Welcome to the Career Ready Podcast. Learn about resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn, interviewing, and all things you need to be career ready with the Career Service Center at College of DuPage. I'm your host for this episode, Pierre Michaels. For today's episode, I'm excited to have Jim Fuller, the general manager of the student newspaper here at College of DuPage. In addition to his work at COD, he has a lot of insight and knowledge to share about the world of journalism. With Jim's insight, we are learning a little bit about the field of journalism, but also looking at the industry's technology disruption and what we can learn from it as we prepare for the future of the AI technology disruption hitting all fields. Jim, it is great having you here today.
Thanks for having me on. I'm always excited to talk about journalism or communications.
All right. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say. But before we really jump into things, can you just get us started with a quick introduction, or as we like to say, your elevator pitch?
Yeah, definitely. Well, my story in journalism really just sort of starts with, a love of information and just kind of general curiosity about the world. I always think of journalism, and I tell this to my students, as like a reverse PhD. And that with a PhD, like you learn a lot about a very narrow topic of study. You know, if you study biology and you're a PhD in biology, you know a ton about biology. Journalism is kind of the exact opposite in that, because the day-to-day could be different, you never know. I mean, plans go out the window all the time in terms of what you're going to do in the news world. The news happens when the news happens. And any different day, you need to become a mini expert on tariffs or the economy or crime or politics, depending on what's happening, you learn a lot about a whole lot of different topics. And that was one of my biggest draws to the world of journalism. That and just the love of writing and stories. I'm a big reader growing up, just love the idea, just love stories and the way that they can resonate with you and, wanting to tell my own stories, but true stories. So, that took me to, an undergraduate degree in bachelor's degree in journalism from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. From there, I did a short stint in Washington, D.C. in this program. It doesn't exist anymore. It's called the Washington Semester in Journalism and Politics. That was kind of during the Clinton administration. I went from there. I decided I wanted to come back to Illinois, and I got my master's degree in public affairs reporting from the University of Illinois at Springfield. And then from there, just really kind of launched into my, professional journalism career. While I was doing in grad school, I, was interning with the Chicago Sun-Times, and my bureau chief there had a long history of having worked with the Daily Herald before that. And so I was actually able to get hired by the Daily Herald during a hiring freeze because, again, we're talking career ready, like I knew somebody, right? Mm-hmm. And, so that was great for me. And, spent, 2 decades there, essentially with the Daily Herald just in the last year, kind of going on a freelance route. And along the way, coming here at the college and deciding to pass on all the things that I've learned in my career to the next generation of journalists.
Yeah, thanks for all that. And we've got a lot. I want to hit on a lot more on the field itself and a lot of technical stuff, but I just want to revisit because we're not going to dive deep into it later on, but that little tidbit that you shared there as far as like knowing someone in that connection. Can you just expand on the impact and the power of that? Maybe not just the career perspective, but also like really helping you be better in the field when you have those connections.
Oh my goodness. This is such a huge deal. And it's probably something that we don't talk about enough in the classroom here at College of DuPage. I'm somebody who also presents during our new student orientation. And, one of the things I talk about in terms of getting involved is the idea of networking. And, everybody says you're supposed to, it's not what you know, it's who you know, but nobody ever tells you how to meet these people that you're supposed to know, right? I tell students here that it starts here at COD because so many of the professors and the faculty and staff here still do professionally the things that they're teaching. And so that's, been the case with me as well. So it starts there, and it started there for me too, with my internship with the Chicago Sun-Times. That bureau chief It was in Springfield, Illinois. It was covering, this was the end of the George Ryan administration, one of our many governors who went on to go to prison. Hey, it's a great place to cover politics if you're into that as a journalist. And, it was a two-person bureau. It was the bureau chief, Dave McKinney, and myself. So I got to do a lot, and we worked very closely together. And so we, developed a really good relationship to the point where, when it was time for me to move on, when my program was ending, he wanted to help me. Getting that little, that leg up, the person who knows somebody else and then tapping into that network. And even if it's just somebody who knows a place that might have a job, right, in the future, or hey, or can recommend, I think you would be great at this place. That's huge. So that's just the job side of things. In the world of journalism, when I teach, one of the classes I teach here is Intro to Mass Communications. And I start off the first week talking about interviewing, right? Because it's the bedrock of so many of the things that we do in journalism. And I always talk about, one of the questions I always ask near the end of the interview is, who else should I be talking to about this? Yep. And in that way, your one source leads to the next source or multiple sources. And when I contact those people, I ask them again, who else should I be talking to about this? And in that way, your source network, as we would think of networking in journalism, expands. And those are the people who, once you meet them and connect with them and they see your work and they believe in it, and you've represented what they've said accurately and fairly, they'll even come back to you and say, hey, I've got a great story for you. And then that's how, you really sort of build your career. Because journalism is so much about finding out the interesting things that, may not be obvious to folks, the stories behind the scenes, that sort of thing. And to get those stories behind the scenes, you need to know the people behind the scenes. Yeah. Yeah. So that's journalism networking, journalism sourcing in a nutshell.
Yeah, thanks for letting us go into that little side tangent as we get started here, because like you, I believe this is one of the most important topics that in our office we do really try to promote it, but just in general across campus and even in our own office, we don't do it enough because it is just that valuable. But that whole idea of the source networking, and I just want to point that out, if you are someone trying to just talk to professionals, that idea applies to any field. If you just say, is there someone else I could be talking to? It just turns into more referrals, and that's how you really build up a great network.
100%. I had it's funny you bring this up because just this last week I had a guest speaker come in to talk to my Intro to Mass Communication class, somebody with a background, worked in communications for NASA in her career. And I told the students, I said, hey, remember when we were talking about don't let these opportunities pass you by when somebody interesting with professional background and something you might want to do is presented to you. Don't just be like, hey, it was great to meet you. No, get their card, connect with them, and LinkedIn is huge. And then I saw just this week this guest speaker copied me back on a response that she sent to one of my students who had reached out to her and said, hey, I want to connect with you and network. And, I was really interested in the things that you had to say. And I was like, the light bulb came on, at least for this, one student, this person gets it. And, it just makes me feel, that much more confident in the future for that student.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great that you're bringing those connections to the classroom. Students are taking advantage of it. I'm going to try to bring this back into our topic here. That connection, right? They were able to connect with each other very easily in this digital day and age. But if we go back just, handful, 20, 30 years ago, things looked very different, especially in the world of journalism.
Right.
And there was this whole technology disruption that journalism went through. So can you just describe some of those changes that you noticed or that you're aware of that brought us to this digital media day and age?
Yeah, so I graduated from grad school in 2001, shortly before September 11th, right? And so I was out, interviewing for jobs at various news outlets at that time. And something happened that was really a good example of how things were changing and journalism as an industry wasn't ready. So this was, if you flash back to that time, this is when Facebook wasn't even a thing yet. And, not even was, MySpace, like that stuff hadn't really come on the scene yet. But, the internet and email was really something that had become part of our everyday lives as college students at that point. And I remember interviewing at this particular outlet, and I was getting in the late stages, and I got this interview with the head person in the newsroom at this news outlet. And he asked me, what newspapers do you subscribe to? And I said, none. And he said, well, how do you get your news? And I said, well, I read it online. And he looked at me and he laughed and he said, well, the funny thing about that is you can't take your computer into the bathroom with you. And the funny thing now is you see that all the time in the bathroom, right? We do exactly that now. But it was just, and I just remember thinking at the time, this guy doesn't get what's coming. He doesn't understand, my generation coming out of school, reading it online is the preferred method. It's so much easier. You can get news from so many different outlets so quickly, rather than waiting for that hard copy of the paper to show up on your doorstep. They just didn't see what was coming. It was almost, they thought of it as kind of like a fad, it seemed like. And so the industry spent years and years and years of we have this website. It's just kind of a thing that we're sort of doing, and they weren't really taking it seriously, weren't paying too much attention to it. The stuff they were putting on there, they were all, giving out for free. And that went on for several years until the revenue model for the industry flipped. In that it used to be, for decades, an industry that was heavily dependent on advertising revenue. You used to get these dictionary thick Sunday papers on your doorstep, and it was filled with car ads and sales and, clothes stores and grocery stores and all sorts of stuff, and people trying to sell stuff, the classified ads and job help wanted ads, where, that's where people went, when you were looking for a job. And all that stuff moved online, right? We got Craigslist, Google came on the scene, Amazon. Those ads went away, not entirely, but dramatically. Very quickly, the industry had to adjust to this idea of ads are still going to be a revenue source, but our primary revenue source now is going to be subscriptions. Subscriptions were almost kind of like an afterthought back then, in that it was a number that you could present to advertisers to be hey, your ads are going to reach this many people. Now it's the other way around, So it hasn't really ever figured that out. I mean, the big national newspapers, New York Times, places like that, they're doing relatively well financially. So many of the smaller places have really struggled with that. We've seen a lot of places stop existing. But on the flip side, there has been, this kind of next generation of media, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. The way I think finally media is starting to transform a little bit for better or worse. Not all of it is great, but there's definitely some adjustments happening. And I hate to say it, but some of the product is just kind of this transitioning from that old guard who just really didn't get it because the technology was not part of their everyday lives, not part of their thought process, into a generation where it has been we're native to this sort of thing almost. And they're just starting to get it now. Yeah. But it's been a struggle.
Yeah. And I want to dive deeper into that in a little bit, really looking at some of the parallels of how that old guard didn't understand what was coming and just kind of let things happen, and then all of a sudden they're struggling.
Right.
And we'll get into that with some of those parallels to AI. But before we really get into that, through that transition, right, it probably helped the timing. You were in school, you were being taught in these new things that are coming out. But with that transition from print to digital, what were some of those important skill sets that journalists needed to make that transition?
Well, it was revolutionary just in terms of research. Being deeply able to research a topic. It blows my mind, to think about the days where a journalist would have to go thumb through like a card catalog, right? Like most of the listeners probably don't even know what that is. At a library, try and find, books and stuff and reference materials on a variety of things. And, the internet put all that stuff not just at our fingertips, but later on in our pockets to be able to do that, really quickly. And the idea of, being able to connect you to a much broader range of sources through things like, LinkedIn or, being able to search up a company's website and they'll have like their full staff directory up there with things like email addresses and names and titles and all that stuff. And so early on, first coming into the newsroom, there'd be like a whole desk that was just like various levels of like phone books and yellow pages. And again, those are probably things that at least half the audience isn't going to know what's that. But like having to actually sit through a hard copy thing and try to thumb through and it's like, I'm trying to reach, George Johnson, and you open the white pages and there's 17 George Johnsons. Like, well, okay, I'll start dialing. Yeah. It made things so much easier along those lines. And then, as we've already talked about, connecting to sources and being able to reach out to people through things like email. It used to be you would call a phone number and get maybe an administrative assistant and try to leave a message for somebody, and you never knew whether or not the person actually saw it. These days you can send a message directly to somebody's email, or you can find their LinkedIn account and message them directly, or if they have a social media account, you can message them directly. So these paths kind of cutting out some of these barriers, these middlemen type people who like maybe would try to stop you from getting to somebody, and there's still the old tried and true method of like, somebody's not returning your calls, somebody's not returning your emails, somebody's not responding to your direct messages. Well, you can still go to the building where they work, right? Like there's nothing that's ever going to substitute for that. That's still, a tried and true method. And, something interesting about technology though, is it's made us less comfortable doing those things. The idea of approaching a stranger and being able to ask that person questions, sometimes uncomfortable questions, as a journalist. It's something that, people getting into the profession just took for granted in the beginning. And it's like, even now, decades into the career, like, I still feel anxious sometimes when I have to ask somebody a difficult question. But you do it. Now it's like, I think like in my intro to mass comm class, the interview week, I tell the students, this is a communications class. You're going to do better if you communicate with me and each other. And so for the interview assignment, if you interview somebody else in class, which is probably a stranger you don't know, I'll give you both bonus points. Do they do it? No, they'd rather go talk to their friends. They'd rather talk to their parents, something like that. So even with the lure of free bonus points just for talking to the person next to you, they're still so hesitant to do it. Yeah. So it's like you got to continue to force them into those difficult situations.
Yeah, and that whole technology, right? We see that with everyone here at a college campus. Like, the email is just so much easier. It's so much, less intimidating to have that conversation. And I know we're at the early stages here, but we now have AI coming into play. How do you see that impacting the field or changing some of those things?
You're going to put me on record here and get me in trouble, aren't you? I know I have a different take on this than, some of my colleagues and maybe in some of the other departments here on campus. But, I tell my students right from the beginning, class number 1, I even have it in my syllabus, that you should use AI tools. Yep. The reality is, well, number 1, I would never, and I tell them this, I would never tell you to not use something that I use myself as a professional. I would never tell you to not use something that I know lots of other people that I work with professionally are using as, a tool in their toolkit now. And so I think we do our students a disservice when we, try to treat it like the boogeyman. And it's funny because, like, you can see parallels to, other technology improvements, this idea that, TV is going to kill radio and, podcasts are going to kill radio and YouTube's going to kill TV and, cable TV is going to kill network TV. And, it's just like these boogeymans that like, we can't, keep that away from me and all that. But, what I tell people is that specific to the world of journalism is that AI is not going to take your job as a journalist, but a journalist who knows and understands AI will take the job of a journalist who doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the truth. There's people out there who don't want to hear it. I see it on the message boards all the time. The company tries to bring in some sort of AI tool and, I'm never using that and, that sort of thing. Even for stuff like, hey, suggest some better versions of, SEO friendly headlines for me. Like, no, like it's got to be a human being that does that. And the answer is yes, but also like use it as a tool, not as a replacement. And that's what I tell my students as well, because, and I put it in a harsh way. I'm like, if whatever you're doing, your AI can be used to the extent where it does it just as well or better than you, then what do I need you for? So that's why I tell my students, I'm like, you need to learn how to use AI as a tool to make you better.
Right.
Not make AI better than you. And there's a difference there that people, need to recognize and understand. And it's coming, guys. I'm going to tell you, I was just last week, for the first time, I saw a posting by a national news organization who is specifically looking to hire an AI-assisted journalist, right?
Yeah.
Meaning that the job was specific that like we expect and require you to use AI tools for this position. And so again, that's not like it's a job posting, right? It's not like AI is doing the position. No, it's a human being using AI as a tool to assist with this specific position. And we're going to see more of that.
Yeah.
As people figure these things out and as the tools get better, and people who are just going to, dig their heels in and say like, no, push back, it's going to pass you by. In the same way that people have refused to like use and adopt social media, are getting passed by, in the same way that, people, thought like the internet's a fad, is getting where it got passed by. You can't just ignore the way technology evolves. You have to figure out how to use it for your benefit.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you taking that perspective, bringing it to the classroom. That's what we're trying to emphasize through our office. There's a lot of unknowns with AI and where things will end up, but it's going to go somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. It is here to stay.
Absolutely.
And we have to be prepared to use it, to know how to use it ethically, use it appropriately. So I'm glad that you're having those conversations in the class. I'm glad that we can have this conversation right now. And, kind of thinking of journalism going through one technology disruption, mm-hmm. now going through the AI disruption that every industry is going through here.
Right.
So just kind of thinking of what we've seen from that earlier technology disruption to this AI disruption, how, on kind of like a broader perspective, not just journalism, can we prepare for this change that is coming?
Well, I would encourage all the faculty, not just at College of DuPage, but just anybody who's in a teaching profession at all levels, to start thinking about this tool as something that will be integrated into our everyday lives the same way the internet and email and social media have become. Don't think of it as the boogeyman. First of all, start tinkering with it yourself so that you can get an understanding of how it can be helpful to you and what you do. And then, making it, because, in the early stages here, there's been a lot of like, we can't let AI into the classroom. We can't, it's going to replace thinking, for students. And that's the wrong way to go about it, I think. It's, again, teaching students how to use it as a tool and as you said, in an ethical fashion and a helpful fashion. So it starts with getting comfortable and familiar with and integrating it, at the educator level. And then, for anybody who's in any sort of a profession, and it's going to be hard to imagine a profession where AI doesn't touch in some form or fashion. The free versions of these tools, are very, helpful, at least in terms of getting an idea of what does this thing do, mm-hmm. and what it can do and what it can't do. and how it's evolving, and just being able to see where it may be going and what it might be a useful tool for. And so that means incorporating that into your classrooms, incorporating it into your lesson plans, incorporating it into your own, everyday life. And I'm not like a tech evangelist in that I don't think tech is the be all end all for things by any means. I think humans will always play a very valuable role in the unique way only human beings can do in you name it in terms of the career. But, this is not something that, we should fear because, again, if you're so afraid of it that you're not willing to see the potential of it and, accept that potential into your work life, then somebody who is willing to do that is going to take your job. At some point, that's a harsh message, but I would just refer everybody back to when the internet came on the scene, when social media came on the scene, and especially for, we're talking the world of communications, when podcasts, came on the scene, and just being like, oh, that's a cute thing, and just sort of dismissing it and not really trying to understand what it's all about. You make yourself irrelevant, and don't do that, because you want to be employable and a valuable employee at that. So explore these things and figure out what they can do for you.
Really thinking of AI as a tool to help you do your job better, right? To how can we use this? I personally, I'm not a big technology person in the sense that I think technology is extremely important. I embrace it when I have to, but we want to make sure that we're using it to better what we're doing, right? Because we could just have technology come in and do everything for us, but then we're missing out on a lot.
For sure.
And, sometimes I like to do things the old way just because it keeps me involved. It helps me stay sharp on things. And when we become too dependable on the technology, we start missing out. So trying to find that balance of how can we use this, but still make sure we're involved through that process.
Yeah, and I think that's the stage we're in right now, is like figuring out what the balance is, figuring out what the use cases are, and just experimenting to see like, okay, let me try using it for this. And how did that go? I can't really think of a single instance where I've used AI where I've taken something from it, like just, whole cloth and been like, yep, that's it. Work's done. It's always like, okay, it's one of those tools. It's a great tool to get your mind thinking, and just like, okay, like, yeah, maybe something like that is suggestion, but that is suggesting, but I would do it this way, tweak these things, X, Y, Z. And, that's where I found it, most useful, kind of like a brain assistant in a way, somebody to, if I've got writer's block or, I'm stuck I want to make, here's a great example. So like, if I'm covering, I did this just recently, I'm dropped into a situation that I'm not familiar with in a community that I'm not familiar with, and I'm asked to do a story about interest, like tourism. It was a tourism-based story for a community that I'm not tremendously familiar with, and what's the state of local tourism? And okay, well, I hop on LinkedIn, and figure out who's active in that world, and it's just like, hey, AI, whatever AI tool I'm going to use, I'm about to, I'll drop in that person's LinkedIn profile, maybe a clip or two or something that I found about them on the internet, maybe their personal website, and I'll say, I'm going to interview this person for this story about tourism. Give me like 10 questions that I might want to ask him. And, it'll come back with stuff and I'll look at him like, yep, that was on my list. That one is, oh yeah, that's an interesting one. Like that hadn't popped into my mind. Let me consider adding that one to it. And so that's the way, like, now, did the AI tool do the interview for me? No, of course not. So like, that's the human being factor still. But it's useful just in terms of like, covering your bases. And, one of the things I like to do is I'll write my full story and I'll drop it into an AI tool and I'll say, hey, give me 5 questions a reader might still have after reading my article, just to make sure, like, am I answering everything that might pop into the mind of my reader on this? And a lot of time, and like, if it comes back with 5 questions, I'm like, yep, I answered that in this paragraph. Yep. I get at that over here, but, oh, this one, That's an interesting one. Like, let me see if I can do a little bit more reporting on that question there, and maybe insert a paragraph about that. I think it can help you be just more complete and thorough, and again, just assist you along the way. Not replace you, but assist you.
Yeah. I'll be honest, that's how a lot of these questions came about, because I had this idea of our conversation. I'm like, I'm not exactly sure, I've never worked in journalism. I had an idea and told AI, I'm looking at this interview. I want to cover these topics. What would be good questions?
Yeah.
And then it gave me, I think I asked for like 20. I always ask for more.
Sure.
And then I go through it. I'm like, okay, these are similar questions. Oh, I like where they're going here.
Right.
And then I jump in there and I turned it into our conversation today.
Beautiful. Right. I love that AI prompted you to ask about AI. It's got a big ego, AI.
I wanted that to be part of the conversation here. So as we think of AI and just the volume of sources that are out there now, right? It's really intimidating. And, especially, when we start throwing out this word fake news, or that phrase fake news, right? That is way overused or like misunderstood in that terminology, but it really brings up to an important part of credibility, because AI could just come up with something. People, not even AI related, could be posting stories because it's so easy to do in this digital day and age. So just with that in mind, what are some key strategies you would recommend to people in evaluating the reliability or bias of that information that they're consuming?
For sure. Well, there's a saying in journalism, an old saying in journalism that says, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Cross-reference that with dad, maybe your brother or sister. Hey, how does mom really feel about me? But it gets to this idea of like this, don't ever really necessarily take anything at face value, even if it seems obvious that it would be true. Check and double check and do your homework. Has some of that gotten, this is a whole nother topic of conversation, but, in the rush to be first in the world of media, to have the story first, like you heard it here first, that sort of thing. I think journalism has gotten a little bit more careless with that, first making sure that it's right and accurate and true. And that's gone towards undercutting some of the trust and credibility in journalism. And that's really unfortunate. And so I always tell my students, like, to be first and wrong just shows like you're the first idiot. Like, that's not going to do you any good, right? And it's going to make the next time when you're first and have it right, people be like, yeah, but remember that guy said blah, 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 like that was baloney. And after a while, you lose your audience. And if you have no audience, you're just kind of talking to nobody. So trust above all, and it starts with getting it right, from the beginning. I feel like media literacy is low right now. And some of that is due to lack of it being a teaching topic. I try to talk about it quite a bit in my classes, but, the flood of information, the flood of media, rather, I would say, coming at us in any given day. People don't even realize the stuff that, it's other than when we're sleeping, and some people sleep with a TV on, like, it's a constant tsunami of stuff that comes at you. And, anybody, go on your cell phone right now and check how much time you spend on any app that, comes at you with, information, just to get an idea of what your brain is trying to sort through in any given day. It's just a tremendous amount. And there's a lot of stuff that is, misinformation, people that don't really have the facts correct, but present it as if they did, unknowingly. And then there's a lot of disinformation out there, stuff that is wrong and intentionally wrong and attempting to mislead and deceive you. And the way social media works with their algorithms, it puts you in a loop of continually seeing the things that you want to see, whether they're true or not. It makes us a little bit less discerning because, you'll see a story and the algorithm says, oh, this person likes stuff like this, stuff like this, stuff like this. And this is how things like, TikTok learned how to show you like what, in its, for you and, just the general channel, like on Instagram and stuff like that, how it picks what it shows you. But then you never see like ABC is saying this, but, NBC's got it a little bit different. So maybe this tidbit of information isn't right, or maybe, they've got the level of information on there, and we don't get exposed to that because it gets filtered out by these algorithms. And then, we have this phenomenon of places that try to present themselves, disinformation outlets, really like propaganda style type outlets on all levels of the political spectrum, that try to present themselves as fact-based sources of information, but they're really trying to sway it in a particular way, creatively leaving out some important facts, maybe even making up some other anecdotes or stories that just completely aren't true, and presenting them as if they are, like even down to like the design of it, the graphic design and the look of it, to kind of lull you into this false sense of security that like, yeah, this is true and this is real. And then it gets doubled down by the algorithm with everybody else saying like, look, if you see like one story that's not true, and then it gets liked and shared by like 10,000 people who just clicked share without even sometimes reading the article, it starts to feel like, oh, well, all these people think it's true. It must be true. And unfortunately, a lot of times, especially on social media, increasingly, that's just not the case. And so, it's really incumbent on us to do our homework, go beyond single sources of information, actually click and read on the thing that you're sharing on social media so you know what it says beyond the headline. Going to like the website source, and seeing like, things like, well, who's quoted in the article? Oh, it's the entire thing is anonymous, or there's nobody quoted at all. It's just, some random photo that they found on the internet and stole and then put some baloney, National Enquirer style, headline and story on it. And understanding that it's funny, I've seen like people like just share stuff from like The Onion, which is a satire website, and be like, can you believe this? And I'm like, actually, I can't, because that's The Onion and it's satire and it's not true. And people they'll come back like, well, you're just biased. I'm like, no, literally, that's a satire. Like, go look at the website.
They got to understand their source, because obviously The Onion is telling a story here. They're not telling news. Exactly.
It's like a Saturday Night Live skit, in print. So, just taking the time to do, but it's so easy, when you're on social media, especially, to just, click that share and heart it and, send it out into the world without really having done the homework on whether or not that information is true. And there's just, an epic proportion of that right now. And because people look at those things, those sources of disinformation, and they're being told that this is the new media or whatever. Well, it's, again, undercutting trust in people who are actually making a real concerted effort to get it right. Because they're being lumped in with all that other stuff. And so we need to do our work with some media literacy and really teaching people to, hey, if it's important enough to you and that it's going to change your way of thinking about something, then, really dig in. Do the work to figure out whether or not it's a reputable information source, and it's like a scientific study. Have the results been replicated? By other people independently from this source. So you can have an increasing level of trust that this is actually true.
Yeah, and I see the importance of this media literacy playing out on the job as well. Right? Not just journalism, but, any career path, you have to be able to discern what is truth, what is out there, what can that company use to actually move forward professionally. So understanding this media literacy, this is why I want to talk about it with you on the Career Ready podcast, is yeah, it plays out in journalism, but it plays out in all professional fields. So I guess any thoughts just in general, how this media literacy could impact a career path or decision making?
Well, yeah, I mean, just again, people being willing and able to do the homework of I think it's very difficult to do any job successfully if you're not dealing with a set of factual and true information to get the job done. Because if you're going down this path of something that's not valid or something that's not true, whether that's creating a product or it's providing a service or it's in the world of communications or, just on the job, if, so-and-so told you that this is happening, and then you share that story, with your colleagues and it turns out not to be true, or like you didn't do the work to actually check and verify, like maybe I should actually check and see with somebody else who was there, is that really going on? If you're just sharing that stuff, like it makes you look like a fool. And, it's the sort of thing that prevents progression in a career. It can kill a career, particularly, like I said, in the world of journalism. Like, if you develop this reputation as somebody who's you've repeatedly, putting stuff out there that's just not true, trust, credibility. I mean, eventually you lose your audience. And then if you have no audience, you don't have anything. Yeah. And it's the same thing, in any workplace. If you lose the trust of your coworkers, if you lose the trust of your supervisors and, the people in the C-level suites, that's a wrap. They're going to find somebody else on the team who is willing to do the careful work to make sure that, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. It's, I share a slide to this point because, I tell people in my class, I said, there's little things that to you seem like a little thing, like it's a typo or it's a misspelled name or, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal. But, if you're in the world of marketing and you're put on a $50 million campaign to do billboards for Burger King, and all those billboards say Burger Kong, somebody's getting fired. And it's probably going to be you if that was your job. So, it's just one letter, right? But it's a big deal. I don't have it at the top of my mind, but there was recently in the last couple of years, somebody, I think he was like a CFO for a big company, and he had, in an annual report, he had misplaced the decimal point on like projected earnings or something like that. It was 1 decimal point. And as the result of that report, like there was a huge stock sell-off in the company. People are like, oh my gosh, they didn't, like it's so far off of what we thought it was going to be. And it was just, he put the decimal wrong, fired.
Yeah.
Just because you put 1 decimal point in the wrong place. So it matters. Yeah. The details matter. And you have to take the time to get it right. And you can't count on somebody else, fixing it for you or catching that. Like it starts with you, and everybody has to take personal responsibility for that.
Yeah, just to bring it up, made me think of a lot of conversations I have about the resume, like inconsistent formatting, right? Those little things. It's attention to detail. It's credibility. If you have on your resume attention to detail, and then you have something out of whack, whatever, right? Well, there you go. You're not a liar, right? Or you're a liar, right?
Exactly.
You're not
exactly.
Doing it. So as we wrap up here, are there just anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Just for folks out there who are still interested in journalism as a profession, and I'm happy to say that this semester and the semester before my Intro to Mass Comm class, when I asked students, what are you thinking about studying, I'm seeing more and more hands go up for journalism, and that feels great. What I'll say in that regard is that at its core, journalism is about sharing true and factual information with people, and there's been a desire and a need for that forever. Go back to, hey, is that, mushroom on the ground okay for me to eat, fellow cave dweller? Well, so-and-so tried that and died. Well, okay, maybe I should say, that's information sharing, at a basic level. And so that's always going to exist. People are always going to have a need and a desire, a need, number one, for information to navigate their everyday life successfully. And then also a desire and a curiosity to know more about the people around them and the world around them. Best stories are always about people. In whatever form or fashion it takes, that's journalism. And journalism will continue to be around and evolving. We're in a major state of evolution right now where, we're seeing, more and more it started with social media, but more and more transition into this idea of the journalist as the journalist's own brand, and people in communications have known this for a long time. But you're more than just a byline now. You're more than just the person who sits behind the anchor desk. You're more than just somebody who works at ABC or CNN or Fox or the New York Times or the Washington Post. You're also you. And so there's that individual brand as well. And we're seeing people branch out in things like having their own major separate presence on social media from their employer. We're seeing people branch out and have their own podcasts, either separate or related to their employer, their own YouTube channel, their own email newsletter. And that's great. And you should continue to explore that world of a personal brand and entrepreneurship and get yourself out there and get yourself seen and known. It starts, I tell my students right now, I'm like, if you want to, someday have your own TV show, there's nothing from stopping you from doing that on YouTube right now. Mm-hmm. It may be a lower tech version, but get started. Show people what you can do. Same thing like, with a podcast. The barriers to all that stuff are gone. You don't even need, you want to be a rapper? You don't even need, to get picked up by a major label to have anybody hear you. We've got Spotify. You can get your stuff up there on your own right now. If you want to be an author, we've got Amazon Publishing. You can put your stuff out there right now. You want to be a journalist, start your own website, have an email newsletter. There's no barrier to that anymore. So start doing it now. Get those reps in. In terms of doing the work, and you'll be that much better for it and able to bring your own audience with you. That's huge as well. If you can bring your own audience with you to any sort of an employer, I do that now as a freelancer. It's just like, hey, you hire me for this job because, I'm going to once I'm done with whatever I'm doing for you, I'm going to kick it out to, my social media audience. And that's, that much more, and it may be an audience that is totally foreign to you, that, could come to the table for the first time. And it makes you that much more valuable, that much more marketable. So be there, get out there, do those things, have that presence, think about your own personal brand, because I think more and more that's the direction things are going.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim, for this great conversation. I love that ending note there of just putting yourself out there, branding yourself, being aware of all the technology that's out there at the kind of the central theme of our conversation, not just the AI, but the social media, and being able to embrace those things to really put yourself out there and demonstrate to the world that you're career ready.
Right. Absolutely.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks to all our listeners, and special thanks again to Jim for joining us on the podcast. We hope you found this information insightful on how changing technology impacts the workforce. And if you have a question you want to hear answered in a future episode, you can submit it to careerpodcast@cod.edu. Be sure to follow us on social media at COD Career Services.